Okay, now that we have created the dock itself, it's now about time we start texturing these planks. And as you know, if we will start to texture these planks, all of them kits will get textured as well. But as you know, we have decimated these too far, and if we start to bake these on top of each other, we're not really getting a desired result. You see, this is a pure mess if we try to bake this on top of it. So we're going to go into ZBrush and use the undecimated meshes that we have. You see these amount of polygons that we have here. So we're going to export this to Blender and then place them on top of each other so that we can start to bake these onto those low poly versions. You see, for example, this particular one has a lot of details compared to what we have in Blender. So first, this kit isn't what we are going to use. So let me take this and I can safely delete this because I'm not going to use it. So this one, by holding down Alt and click, we delete them. So this one also delete, delete, and delete. Okay, now we are left with these kits that we're going to be using. So I believe I really do not know which one of these I'm going to delete. I know that I'm going to keep this one, but about these ones I really do not know. And since these ones are really a small meshes, I keep them and later on we'll do. So let's start to decimate these so that they are a bit smaller in size when we export them into Blender, because as you know, Blender is a bit heavy on handling high poly meshes. So I'm going to take them one by one and decimate them to a reasonable number. So I'm going to decimate these using the same technique. I'm going to take individual planks and go into this decimation master and then pre-process, and when it's finished I'm going to bring a reasonable number in here and then decimate this. For example, I might keep only 50% of these polygons, and now it really decimated without losing any quality. And I'm going to import this into Blender so that we give it proper material, place it on top of the low poly so that later on we export this as high poly to be baked on top of the meshes inside Substance Painter. So I really do not care about how much these polygons are, because this is the high poly and not going to be used in final production. I want to only be able to use the information of this and bake it on top of that one. So the next one, now that I'm looking at it, I can tell that, for example, without doing pre-process and giving it decimates and give it a percent, I'm going to come in here and write 300, and this 300, and if I hit custom and 300, it's going to decimate, pre-process the mesh and decimate it at the same time with only one click of a button using this amount of vertices that we give it. And now you see the amount is perfectly 300,000 polygons. And this is another way of doing it with instead of going pre-process, giving a value to see if it works or not and decimate them to get the result that we have. So now you have seen me do this decimation, and I don't want to take your time repeating the same thing again and again. So I'm going to pause the video and get back to you when the decimation process is done. You're not going to lose anything because you have seen this process, and I'm not really going to bother you watch this again and again because this is a repetitive process. Okay, I did the decimation using the same settings that I told you, and now we have 5 million polygons, which is a lot more manageable than 20 million polygons. Of course, for Blender, if you have a beefy machine, you can try and import these undecimated and untouched. But since now I'm recording at the same time, some of the resources are busy, and I really do not want to overkill. So I'm going to take all of these and export them as FBX. And let's name it HP from ZBrush so that I know it's a high poly from ZBrush, because later on we are going to export this high poly out of Blender. So the settings are good. all binary, triangulated, and smoothed normals. So let's hit OK. It's gonna take a bit of time to export these. Okay, it exported, and now let's go to Blender, and I'm going to keep these, and let's select all of them and put them in the same folder to keep things organized. So hit M and create a new collection, and let's call it this LP. Okay, now all of these are folded under the same thing. I can toggle them on and off. And now let's go and import the FBX that we created. This is it, HP from ZBrush with all of the settings as default, and I'm going to import FBX. And it's going to take a while in Blender because Blender, as you know, isn't so great when it comes to manage whole millions of polygons. Unless it's for my case, I don't know. So you have to wait and do not do anything because this hasn't crashed. The software is doing the process under the hood, and you're going to get your files as soon as it starts importing. Okay, now it did it and imported the objects for us in here and perfectly in the place as well. So these two are not used. I'm going to delete them. And in this one also I could delete this, but let's keep it because it's not going to be baked and anything we do is going to be redundant. Okay, and now you see all of them have been placed on, and now we need to do a couple of things. First, we need to make sure that every one of these belongs to the same texture set because Substance Painter recognizes the files as texture sets. For example, if I select it here, you see the material is bark 14, and if I select the underneath piece, it's bark, and it's not going to bake inside Substance Painter because Substance should recognize both of these to have the same texture set so that it bakes them on top of each other. So let's select this bark, this whole bark, and for this I'm going to create a new material for it, or let's assign the bark to all of them. Okay, it now has put the bark material on all of them, and now Substance Painter knows that it should bake this on top of this one. And there's a case when you have some overlapping meshes. For example, not overlapping, I mean in terms of high poly and low poly. Some overlapping low poly meshes. For example, these ones that should bake on top of each other. For example, this is going to be baked on top of this, something like this, that these meshes have some interactions. And if you do not start to name them, Substance Painter by default will start to bake these, and these will assign effects to each other. And it's going to create some ambient occlusion and cavity and dirt in these areas, which is normally what happens in real life. But if you do not want to make these affect each other, you want to select this. For example, change the name. For example, this one being 01 underline low and the high poly being 01 underline high, and then name this one 02 underline low and then high poly 02 underline high, and rename them so that Substance Painter knows not to bake these on top of each other. So we are not going to use that for now, so we do not really care about it. Let's leave it be. So this one, I'm going to select them all and assign a new material. Let's go for a new material and call it planks, and hit OK so that it overrides all of the materials that we have here. And also we want to select these and assign the planks material to these as well. Okay, and now what we are going to do is select these. These are the high poly meshes that we imported from ZBrush, and let's bring them to check if we are right about this. So all of them are here. Let's create a collection, select them all, create a collection, and call it HP. And this is for organizing purposes. Really, you can really live without that as well. So let's select LP And now these are low poly meshes that we have, and let's select them all, and I want to export these as a single file. And when we import this into Substance, we are getting two texture sets, one for planks and one for these barks. So I'm going to export this. Let's call it doc final underscore lp and limit the export to selected object and export. And since this was a simple file, it really exported so well. And now let's deselect this and select all of these meshes in the HP folder. And these are our high poly meshes. So let's select this and export and call it doc final underscore HP. And because these are high poly, they're going to take a while to export. Not so long, but you can tell that it might take 3 to 5 minutes. Okay, it exports. Okay, the exporting is finished. And now let's open Substance Painter. Okay, here we are in Substance Painter. And to create the file, we go to File and New. And from this menu, we can select the low poly mesh. And from here, I'm going to use doc final low poly. And for document resolution, we really do not care because later on inside Substance we can change it. And for normal map format, let's set it to OpenGL. Later on we will convert this into DirectX, and we will show how to convert this into DirectX for reading inside Unreal, because Substance is better reading OpenGL and Unreal is better reading DirectX. So for Unreal Engine also we can check this to be on. And for these ones, we really do not want to do anything because we do not have any camera and we do not want it to unwrap it for us because we have done the unwrap inside Blender. So let's hit import, and it's going to take a second to import for us. So let's check to see if everything is alright. We have these mesh, we can paint on them, and let's select this one as well. And now that I'm painting on this, there's a lot of painting happening in here, and this is what really we don't want because this is now a part of this texture set. So in here, let's disable the high poly and bring the low poly to check this. Yeah, this one is using the planks, and I need to apply the bark material to this. So all of them are bark, and now let's take them and do another export and overwrite this low poly file. And now let's go to Substance, and you can either go and hit new, or you can go in the project settings, and in here you want to select and bring the low poly file and hit OK so that it imports the new settings for you. So now that I'm going to paint on this, I'm still getting the same error. So let's hit new and again bring the low poly, and now let's check. Now all of these are from the same texture set and not really having any problems. So now you can hit F1 to see the UVs as well. And let's select this one, and this is the UV for this one as well. And these I didn't select the bolts, so let's select them and export again. Limit selection to selected objects, and now again I'm going to hit new and bring low poly. And there are a lot of times which problems of this nature happen, and you have to constantly go back and forth to see what is going on. Yeah, and this one is alright. Let's go to planks, and I'm able to paint on this. UVs are alright, and we're ready to bake. So hit F3 to go to texture mode, F2 to 3D viewport. So for baking, we need to go to this texture set settings, and from here there's a option called bake mesh maps. And when you hit it, you get some options because Substance Painter it is heavily relying on a smart mask to do the texturing for us. For example, you see in here, let me show you something. This one is that obvious. So you see there are a lot of surface breakup and edge breakup also happening there. And if I drag this into the surface, you see there's nothing like that. And that is why, because we haven't baked anything on top of these. And Substance Painter heavily relies on the mesh maps that we bake on this. For example, this curvature map tells the software where to put the curvature data. For example, this ambient occlusion map for ambient occlusion, and also any map has its own usages. So we baked maps so that we can bake maps from high poly onto the low poly so that these smart materials and a smart mask also work in there as well. So let's deselect all of them, and we are going to only be working with normal for now to see if that's working or not. So let's apply the resolution to be 2K, and from here we're going to pick up a high definition mesh. So from here I'm going to select the dock HP, and for the next results, the important ones is this anti-aliasing. I'm going to set it to 4, and this by mesh name is what I told you. If you want to bake some meshes on top of each other and do not want to make those meshes affect each other, you change their name and hit match only by mesh name so that every mesh with the same name gets baked on top of each other. So for now, let's hit bake, and there's one this max frontal distance and max rear distance. If you go into Blender and you see this mesh in here, let me select it. When you're trying to bake a mesh, a high poly mesh on top of low poly mesh, Substance Painter is always going to shoot a lot of rays out and catch those informations and bake them back into low poly. And this is done through a system called cage. And Substance Painter uses a cage to shoot the rays out. And the value that we put in here, max frontal, are for the rays that are going to shoot outwards, and this rear distance is for the rays that are going to shoot inwards. And an example of that would be, let me make this visible. So let's say that we want to bake this high poly mesh, this one, on top of this. What Substance Painter is going to do is using a cage map, and the cage map is the same size of the mesh. And if we alter this number to be something bigger, for example, this very 0.01, it's going to create a cage that is a little bit bigger than the mesh. And this is going to encompass the whole mesh. You see, this is protruding out of the surfaces of the mesh, and it's going to bake shoot until this far and take a lot of information that is in between. And if the cage file is a little bit smaller, it's not going to take the high poly information from the high poly. So you always need to bring in a good value in the here. So I'm going to extrude it a bit so that we get a bit of more information if there's anything to bake. So let's hit bake selected, and it's going to now bake planks, and it's already giving me some errors. Let's see what is happening. So okay, there's nothing. The problem was with my C drive, it was full and it was giving me these errors. So I emptied out a couple of gigabytes so that I can work with this project. So let's go and start with the bark and hide these and start to bake the maps. Okay, let's go into here, and first normal, let's put the resolution to 4K and HP selected, and I'm going with the same distance in both frontal and rear, and I have put the anti-aliasing to be 4x4. Of course you can go longer, but that is how I'm rolling with. So let's start to bake, and now you see the normal is being baked onto the mesh that we have here, and it's baking perfectly without any problem because all of the naming conventions, material texture set, texture placement, and anything are there. So if you want to see the baked normal, you hit B and it brings you to the baked meshes in here. And you go in here and find the normal. And this is the baked normal that we have brought in. And this is from ZBrush being baked down into here. And these leakages that you see here is because the seam has been a bit distorted, but it's not a really problem because it's not really a thing to be considered because it's not a huge problem. So let me go in here and now I'm going to bake world space normals and AO. The world space normal is something just like the normal map, but it has some position information in it, I believe. And AO is going to give us where the mesh isn't getting any light. So let's hit bake bark. It baked pretty fast, and the ambient occlusion and thickness map are going to be the longest in terms of baking. And AO is also going to make those parts that are a bit like crevices and things like that and make them darken so that the dirt can occlude in there. Basically, the whiter the color is, the more exposed to the sunlight it's going to be. So let's go and find the ambient occlusion. And this is what we get. You see in here where there is crevices in the normal map in this part, for example, this part is going in and it's giving the ambient occlusion a dark color so that we know that there's indentation in here. So AO baked as well. Let's go for curvature and position. And the reason that I'm not baking ID because these are separated from each other and can easily be selected. And if we had a complex mesh, we would have had to create an ID map for it. But this is not, so we are not creating any ID map. So let's bake curvature and position as well. And curvature is going to identify where places are having edge. For example, in here, you see there's an edge in here to make the bakers and a smart mask to put the edge information in here. And it's good for having bakers. And this is the position map. And now we already can drag a smart material into this to see how it works. So let's go in here and have something that has some curvature information to it. And now you see in these areas which the curvature is happening, it has placed this for us. And you see this area is an edge, it has highlighted this edge for us. And you see these areas happening. So we're going to bake the thickness map as the final, and it's going to be the longest in terms of baking time. And it's going to define how thick or how thin the object really is for applying effects like subsurface scattering, painting a skin, and things like that. And those areas that are white or towards the white, something like this, are the thickest ones, and those black ones are the thinnest ones. And it's good for some operations that this smart mask do. And you see this one being the thickest one has a bit of lighter shade compared to these thinner ones. It's especially useful when we are creating textures for skin or for foliages or things like that. Okay, this is baked as well without any problem, and I'm going to save this and go for the next one. So let's go into texture set and hide this and go for these planks. Okay, let's go to texture set, and again we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to bake the normal first to see how it works. Always I try to start with the normal to see if it works or not, to see if I see any problem or not. And it's working perfectly fine without any problem. And it worked fast too. So you see these normal that is happening in here. So this is fine. I'm going to activate all of them at the same time: curvature, position, AO, and thickness. And hit bake planks, because if you hit bake selected textures, it's going to bake these textures that we have selected for all of the texture sets in here, which bark is one of them. So I'm going to set for bake planks so that it only bakes for the planks. So I'm going to pause the video until the time that the baking has been created. So see you there. Okay, baking done, and now we're ready to start texturing this. But and when it comes to texturing, just like the scene creation, when we created with block out and going from big, medium to small, we are starting this one also with big, medium, and a small. We are creating things that are bigger and visible from so far away. For example, if you assign a default texture to this, from so far away, you're only able to see and distinguish some primitive colors. And when you go in here, you start to see some wood fibers. And if you zoom on here, you start to see this individual bumpiness and things in the texture. And this is the way we're going to create our texture. First, we are going to create primitive colors, then start those shapes that are distinguishable from medium distance, and then starting to add those tiny details. And some of the artworks that you see in social media and anything anywhere else, you see that the image has a lot of details, a lot of fine details, and you might be tempted to start with those details, but that is not really how it works. You should start with big and go through medium and a small, and this is the way we're going to go. And for this one also, we need to have a strong texture, a strong reference textures, and I've picked this one because the color is a bit neutral and more towards the real shades of color. And you can really guess that if this scene was a lot of sun here and there, you would have a lot of alteration in the color. And that is why when you're going to do photogrammetry, people always recommend to go on a overcast day, something like this, because the colors are neutral and not touched. And if I wanted to pick the color from something like this, you see there are a lot of post-processing happening in here, and the colors are altered a bit, and these are not neutral colors, and these are colors after applying the post process. So for colors, try to pick up something that is a bit neutral and go on from there. And we also can take this one as well and this one as well, because these have really neutral colors and that really can help us do the texturing. So let's take this one as the base and start to give this a bit of color. So first let's add a fill layer, and I'm going to drag this one out in here so that it's not in the way and we can use it perfectly. So let's add a fill layer, and this fill layer is basically containing the information that makes up a PBR shader, PBR material, color, metallic, roughness, normal, and height. And these are the most important ones when it comes to PBR material creation. And also have in mind that if you want to, for example, only use a color and the roughness, you can try to turn off these channels that you do not use. For example, if you are not going to use any height data on this, you can turn the height down. And it's good for optimizing the substance viewport for yourself. So for the color, let's click on this, or we can click on this and hold and pick a color from here. Something like this. And yeah, this is good. And now let's turn this off, and for the base roughness, I'm going to bring it all the way to here because wood is a rough thing and not so shiny. So let me see if I can drag another color from this, something that has a bit of gray and brown at the same time. So this one might be better. Yeah, this one is better, but I feel like I can really start to add a bit of color contrast into this and make it more towards the dark brown. Okay, this is for primitive color, and if you work in a team, it's better to have a habit of renaming these layers so that whenever people come to this and start to manipulate this, they know what is what and what is going on there. And this fill layer 1, fill layer 2 isn't so descriptive. So I'm going to name this base color. And since these planks belong to a modular kit, we want to be as neutral as possible. For example, you really do not want something like this going on all across your texture, because if you start to duplicate this all around, you're always seeing these obvious repetitions. So try to stay as neutral as possible and as generic as possible when creating kits for modular usage. It's better for usage also. So the most obvious thing when it comes to wood creation is the wood fibers. So I'm going to exclude these two out so that we make them metallic later on. So let's select this and bring this here into this, and I want to call this wood. And on this wood I'm going to add a black mask, and then I can start to select these individual ones. And because these are geometry based, I'm going to here and use the geometry selection and select these. And now these have been added to the folder mask and these not. And every change that we make to this folder is going to only affect these wood planks, not this one. And this foldering is a great system when it comes to material creation. So for the base color, let's right click on it and add a filter, and in here I'm going to bring a contrast to add a bit of contrast to this, and this is really more towards the wood that I'm liking. So let's add a fill layer again and only bring the color, and now create those wood fibers that you see on the wood. And instead of making them in the base color, I'm going to give this base color a color that is visible and add right click and add a black mask, and I'm going to use the masked workflow because this gives me better resolution when it comes to texturing. So on this mask, this is black, and every place that I start to add white, it becomes available, it becomes visible. So I'm going to place mask in here to parts that I want them to be visible. So I'm going to add procedural masks instead of painting masks. So I'm going to come in here, this wizard, and I'm going to add a fill so that I can add some wood texture that I see from here. For example, this one is good for adding those wood fibers that we want. And let's make it directional to the same direction that our wood has, which is vertical instead of horizontal. So let's rotate this 90 degrees, and now the rotation is getting a lot better. So let's give the tiling something obvious. Okay, this is good for adding those primitive wood fibers that you see on woods basically. And you can also apply the balance contrast to see what do you like about this. And you can also add the tiling in here, but I added the tiling in here. Let's make it 3. No, let's go for 2. And now that we have selected where we want our color to be, the mask, now we are ready to go and click on here and pick a color from here. So let's pick a color right from here, a grayish color, and I can bring this up to make it visible more. Or let's see what we can pick from here. Just hold down click on this and come into this texture palette that we have here and start to pick up your texture. Something like this. We want to be as neutral as possible and not adding a lot of details. So for the color adjustment, let's go to fill, add a filter, And I'm going to add a contrast to this as well and make it a bit contrasty. And let's make it lighter a bit. Okay, and now this is really too uniform in terms of roughness. This is the base color, it's doing good. I'm hitting C now to be able to visualize the individual channels, which are color, metallic, roughness, normal, and height. And this is the metallic, which we do not have anything. And this is the roughness. And the roughness is basically the same thing. So let's add a roughness. And now you see by adding this roughness, I have added some roughness variation in here. So I'm going to make this a bit lighter. And now let's go to material and start to rotate the sun in here, and you see a little bit of roughness breakup happening in here. And if I make it pure shiny, you see there's a lot of light being reflected, but the wood doesn't work that way. So I'm going to make this something like this. Okay, and now let's add a new color fill layer, I mean. And first let's add this one a bit of height so that it becomes noisy just like the wood goes. So for the height also, I'm going to make it something like this so that it has a lot of height variation in it as well. So you just should have that in mind, that these are 2K maps, and when we import this into Unreal we export 4K maps and the resolution becomes a lot better. But since now I'm recording at the same time and texturing these, I decided to work with 2K. And if you want to make this more, you can go in here to texture set settings. In this drop down menu, set it to be 4K or 128, 512, 1K, depending on your system. And it's dependent on every texture set. And if I set this to 4K, these bark ones are still remaining 2K. So have that in mind as well. So let's go about wood creation. And as I said, we're going to be so generic and not adding a lot of contrast and visible data in here. Just some generic stuff, nothing more. So let's add a color. And in here, again, I'm going to make the color something really obvious. And in the mask, I'm going to add a black mask and add a fill layer. So I'm going to select this layer and copy it. And of course, have in mind that renaming these layers is a good thing, but since it's going to take a lot of time from us, I'm going to skip this part, renaming this, but also try to rename this. And to dedicate more time from the tutorial to the texturing process, I decided not to rename this because I can put the time that I put to renaming this into texture creation. So have that in mind as well. So let's go in here and start to pick something from these as well. So let's go about these wood fibers as well, and let's see the direction. If I set it to be 90 degree and doesn't work, so let's make it 2, and this adds a lot of those fine wood fibers that you see on woods happening. So let's go, and on hardness we have some procedural controls on how far we can push this. And for knots, let's see if we want to apply any knots or not. So just adding some of them is good, but not so much because it's going to be repeated throughout the whole process, and we really do not want that. So this is a bit too procedural. I'm going to manipulate this using the filters. So on this wood that is driving our mask, I'm going to click on here and go to filter, and in this filter I'm going to come in here and select warp. And this warp, basically what the name suggests, warps the texture and makes it not so uniform. And let's compare it before and after. You see it adds a lot of randomness to this. So let's say that we are happy with this and go in here and try to pick the color from this texture instead of using that obvious color. So let me select something from here. I love this one to be of a darker shade. This one, something like this. Or let me see if I can pick something that is a bit brownish. Yeah, something like this. This is working perfectly, but we need to add a lot of contrast into this. Go to filter and contrast, and need to add or decrease from the luminosity and give it a bit of contrast. Yeah, this one is working all right. And to manipulate the color even more, you can go to this wizard and add filter, and in here you can also select the HSL, which is good for adding hue, saturation, and lightness. Lightness is for darkening and lightening. Saturation is good for making the color pure gray or using the full spectrum of the same color. And this hue is good for altering the color. So let's go for something a bit brownish, something like this. Okay, and now for the saturation, let's add a bit of saturation and bring the lightness down to make this a darker shade of brown. So let me check it before and after. Or let me bring this up. No, let's check this and also this one. And I'm going to select a color from here as well instead of that color. That was not really satisfying to me. So this one is all right. So let's look around. Of course, you should have these places in mind because we're going to use them as well. Because these have a lot of rotation in them. And we rotated them to make the kits. So let's select this. This is all right. And let's give this one a bit of roughness. And I'm going to make this something like this, a bit lighter in terms of roughness. So you see it here. So let's add height as well. I'm not going to be so extreme. So let's bring the height up instead, just something neutral. And let's check it before and after. And bring the height up a bit. Okay, and now this is becoming what I like really. And one thing that I have noticed is that this noise pattern is consistent all across. You see, it's consistent all across our texture, and I don't want that really. I really want to break it just a bit. So let's go and add a fill in here. And from here, instead of using procedurals, I'm going to use one of the baked mesh maps that we baked. So let's see curvature. And this is the curvature map that we baked. And this is the curvature map for the bark. This is the curvature map for the planks. So let's add the curvature. And on this curvature, I'm going to hit subtract. Let's go subtract. And now let's visualize the mask. By holding down Alt and left clicking on this, you are able to visualize the mask. So let's check it before and after. You see it weakens the effect a lot, and also it removes the effect from the edges as well. You see in here, edges are now affected, not affected by the wood fibers that we have. So this is good also about it. Let's add another colors. So for this one, let me make the color a bit more pronounced, something like this. Yeah, I'm happy with it. So let's go and try to inspect the references to see what we come up with. So I'm going to create some general surface noises in here. So let's create that layer, and I hit Control and V because I have copied this one from the previous layers, and every time I hit Control and V, I'm getting this one because I haven't copied any layers, and I'm getting this one. So I have put the color to be red so that I can see what is going on better. So in here, let's search for procedural, and these are the procedural effects that Substance Painter has to offer. So let's pick something directional and click on the mask to see, and I'm going to first put the tiling to 2, and the direction is also looking alright. And if you are not happy with the direction, you can rotate the direction to C. So because the UV creation, I told you to make them all face the same direction, we are getting the perfect direction in here. So let's select this and inspect to see what we come up with. So let's go in here and add another color from this part. So something like this, and try to look before and after. It adds a bit of touch up from this one to the color. So let's see if we can pick the color from here. So something like this is alright. So let's see before and after. No, I'm really not liking these grayish tones. Instead, let me use from this. This has a lot of awesome colors in it. So let's pick the color and pick from here and turn it on and off to see it has only added some color alteration in here. And when I'm creating texture, first and always I try to add procedurals and then add those maps that are related to the geometry itself. For example, let's say that we are happy with the colors that we have created here. Let's paste the base color in here, and let's say that we want to apply a mask that is based on the geometry, and we're going to use the smart masks for that. These masks are based on the geometry and the maps that we baked in the first place in this texture set setting, if you remember. So let's take one of them. For example, one of them that is this edge is more obvious. It's going to use the curvature map, ambient occlusion, and anything to select the edge for us and reveal this color only on the places where the edge is. So let's drag it in here, and you see it has only assigned the color to where the edges are. And I'm going to use this later on to make it a lot more localized and belong to the thing. But for now, I'm only adding those little procedurals to make this wood. So let's add another fill layer, and in here let's go and select to see what we come up with. And there are a lot of awesome procedurals that can help us. I'm first going to go for these directional ones to make it look more like wood. So, and before that, let's disable all of them. This one has the roughness, this one doesn't. Let's make the roughness for it before and after. And now let's go in here, and the first thing that is obvious, we need to rotate this 90 degrees to get it to the direction of the wood. So I feel overall this is too strong. Let's add another fill layer and now pick one of these procedurals, one of random ones, for example like this. So you see this, now I'm going to select the mode and alter it to bake and mix these two based on the blending mode that you are familiar with from the Photoshop. So let's say that I'm happy with this. You see we have this one as the base and we added this using multiply, and multiply is good for darkening and lightening the effect, and since this one is a darker image it tried to darker the mask also. So let's pick up a color from here, just something that we might like, something like this, and always try to not add information that is visible again and again. Just keep them so generic and neutral. So let's say that we're happy with this. I'm going to add a roughness and bring it up. So let's look at the base color. This is what we're getting in the base color. Pretty good. I'm happy with it. And now this is what we're getting in the roughness. And this is the normal map that we are getting after exporting this to Unreal. So let's select this, see, and inspect from all sides to see. Okay, and now let's add more surface breakups to this. Add that fill layer, and in here try to add from these procedurals. For example, this is scratches or splashes. And this one is going to be good. Let's pick a color. And this is good for adding general dirt to our wood. You see it added a good amount of dirt, but since we really do not want this to be so visible and noticeable, I'm only going to go into this and bring the intensity down so that it's not so visible overall. So this is about it. And on the roughness of this one, I'm going to make it pretty rough because this leakage and dust is pretty rough in nature. So if you want to alter this even more, you can do it, but I'm going to place another mask. So from here, let's bring some of the noises. For example, this leakage, this is good really. But I selected this one in a wrong spot. I'm going to place this in the mask, not the base color. So have the name in mind and select it in here instead of there. So search for leak. This is the effect. So I need to manipulate this mask because it's all across and I do not want that. You see there are a lot of shades happening in here and a lot of information. I really do not want that. So let's go to the base color and add a lot of contrast to be only able to visit the black and white data. And now let's look at it here and compare it before and after. You see adding a lot of contrast will help. So, and I think this is overall too strong. Let's give it a bit of rotation, and I'm really liking this. And again, because this is too obvious and going to be repeated all across, I'm really not going to use this so much. But overall, this is a good thing to use. So let's add another color to it instead of this white, something in these shades, something from here. Let's pick a color From here, yeah, this is very good to my taste. But overall, a bit too strong because I do not want to see this repeated all over again. So let's use it from this. Let's hope that this will become a good thing because we're not able to see this. So let's go into base color intensity and drag this down just a bit. Okay, something like this. But this one is really good. Let's make this something like this, and let's see if I can alter the color a bit. So let's add a filter and contrast. Let's add contrast to this. Something like this, and bring the luminosity down just a bit. So this is about this one, and now let's go for the next ones. So let's pick another procedural. Let's search for scratches and select this. And overall, this is an effect, but we like this one inverted. And to invert this, you can go into this wizard and bring in a levels, and in this levels you can hit invert. And now this is the invert of that. But most of the procedurals have also an invert option in them. So the invert is here. And overall now the effect is also too strong. Let's make it less pronounced. And we're going to add only some random colors in here and there. So this one is good also. And now let's go to the color, and before that apply the roughness onto this. I'm going to make it pretty rough. Let me see if I can add a height also to indicate that this one has a volume, not only a texture. So for the height also, I'm going to bring this up because it has a positive volume, not a negative one. So, but of course I feel like the base color is now a bit too pronounced. Now the height needs to be adjusted a bit. So this one is about being finished, and now let's add this and pick a color from somewhere in these areas. And this is good for adding some overall damage and dirt. Yeah, doing pretty good. And if you want the damages to look new, you want to make them lighter. But if you want to make them older and more in there to add a bit of history, you can also make these damages darker a bit so that you can tell that these have been living in there and getting darker over time. So roughness, pretty rough. And I really do not encourage you to go all the way down to here because this pure black isn't so PBR authentic. Just stay in these ranges if you want to be PBR authentic. So let's add a height also, and I want to make this a negative height so that it goes in instead of coming out. Okay, let's see, not so much height, but also just a bit. And now you can also use this slider and go into height and bring the height down to control it. And this is a slider to control how the height should look like. So let's look at this and go into base color. And now again, let's paste that default layer that we created. And again, from these, let's see a scratch. So let's select this. Because this is really too strong, I'm going to only add this. So let's increase the tiling to make this even more. And now I'm going to change the color to something like this. Yeah, this is doing good. To add some overall scratches in here, and I want to make them go in like they have been carved into the surface of the wood. And now you see how by using layering on top of layering we have added a lot of good things in here. And overall I feel like that one is really too noisy, because this is going to be repeated over and over again, and we really do not want to see this happening a lot of time. And although I love this one very much, I have to make a hard decision and delete this. You see how beautiful it has added some contribution to the surface here, but I really have to kill it or make it a bit less pronounced. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions, and this was one of them. So let's see what we can add. Also again, go to top and paste the default, and let's now use this as scratch that is so visible. So this one is good also. Let's give it a tiling of 2. Awesome. But wrong, I have pasted the mask on a wrong place. Let's go in here and place the mask in here. So let's visit the mask. It's pure black and white. There's nothing in between, so we do not really need to care about it. And I'm going to select this noisy one instead. So let's add the tiling to make it more pronounced. Add a bit of random rotation. And in here, we need to pick another color. Something like this. To really carve out the woods. Because these woods belong to a dock where a lot of going back and forth is happening. A lot of people are coming and a lot of people are going. So these woods are going to be old and used and have a lot of a story in them. So let's add roughness. Of course, the roughness is going to be pretty high, and add a negative height into this because I want to carve this into the surface. Something like this. And I'm not going to go too much in here, just a bit. Okay. And now I feel like these overall noises that we had are enough. And I feel like this is too noisy as well. So let's go in here and select another fill layer and bring a random noise like this one to wash out the effect a bit. So let's set it to subtract and check that before and after. You see it has washed out the effect a bit to make it less noisy. So now that I'm looking at this, I feel like this is looking good, and this is the base color that we are getting, and I'm happy with it. And after all, I'm going to add a paint layer, not a fill layer. this paint layer is something that we can paint on top. Of course, we can add a paint color, add a fill layer and start to paint on this using a mask like this. But this paint color is good for adding layers of manual paint. So on this paint layer, I'm going to set it to pass through so that whenever I do a change on this, it's going to affect all of the layers in beneath it. And this is like a snapshot. You see, it has taken a screenshot from the layers beneath it. So I'm going to add a filter, and in the filter in here, I'm going to bring a sharpen. And this sharpen is basically adding a bit of resolution to the image. And now let's visit here and compare it before and after. Adding this, you see it has a lot of sharpness into here, but the sharpness is also too strong. I really do not want it so much, so I'm only adding a bit of sharpness in here. And I'm going to go in here and leave this layer on top and name it sharpen, so that we know this belongs to the sharpen layer and we really should not touch this at all. So let's come in here and select all of these layers, and I can select them and hit Ctrl and G to group them into a folder, and I can call it general wood material. So whenever I can close this, open it, add layers into this, turn it off, turn it on, and do all kinds of things. Okay, and now we have created the general wood, and a wood that we are happy with. And of course, the sky is the limit on how far you can go. You can also try to add more details into this, but I feel like this is good enough because I really do not want to make this so pronounced that it gets noisy into the composition. So I'm only going to add a folder and call this mesh maps. And on this mesh maps layer, I'm going to use these smart masks to generate the noise based on the geometry to make the effect a bit localized. So in here, let's add the same fill layer that we had and pick some of these. For example, let's go for this surface rust. And first, let me remove that, and again, Control C to copy this layer. And now bring this surface rust into here, and this is a mask based on the surface of the geometry itself, not some procedurals. It's using the maps that we baked from high poly to low poly. You see it's here: workspace, normal, position, thickness, curvature, AO, and basically anything. It's using the maps that we baked to drive the mask for us, and it's going to be really dependent on the geometry itself. So let's make the effect less strong, something like this, and I want to bring the contrast down even more. So there are a lot of sliders which you can manipulate, for example taking the effect of ambient occlusion, curvature, or anything to drive the mask for us. But also I feel like this is a bit too strong, and I really do not want to make this happen like this. So let's do something crazy with it. Instead of using a fill layer, I'm going to add a paint layer like this. Let's add a paint layer, and on this paint layer I'm going to call this color variation. And for the, let's add it first, make it pass through so that it affects anything in here, and add a black mask. And in here, right click on the mask in here, and you wanna hit copy mask. It's in here, Control and Alt and C, and come in here, right click, and you should see paste into mask. And this one, now instead of only using a single value, I'm able to use this and alter the whole color that we have here and use that. So let's add a fill layer, add a filter, excuse me, and I can add a hue, saturation, and lightness, and let's bring, so it's not working, let me place it in here, and now it's working because it's now using the layers beneath it. So let's take this and I can change the hue, and you see instead of adding a monotone value like this, we are altering this color which has a lot of values in it. And you see right here what is happening. We are using these colors but altered. This is the result, and this is the result of using monotone layer. And this one is a better way to add some color variations in this. So instead of hue saturation, let's go filter and bring a contrast. And I'm going to make this a bit darker, something like this. And you see how beautiful it adds this color variation in the center. So let's go into the mask in here, and now I'm going to bring the global contrast up, and you see this is a beautiful effect that makes it more look like wood. See a lot of color variation happening in here, which is normal into the woods. You see, for example, in here you see a place of wood is dark, it gets lighter, it gets darker again in the same plank. And this is what is happening there. Really beautiful, and I'm happy with how this color is going. So let's go into the filter and let's see if I can make this a bit like that and make this darker, and look at the colors. Very good. I can add a lot more brown into this. So this is good for color variation. And now let's go and add those mesh map based colors. So let's see what we can do. And I'm thinking to do the same thing instead of using monotone colors, using and altering the same color. So let's see how it goes. So let's turn off this folder and again paint, add a paint layer and make it pass through, add a black mask. And now copy this one instead of copying that. And whenever we try to paste it, we get the same pass through layer. So let's make it obvious, of course, add a filter, contrast, and make the luminosity, bring the luminosity up so that when you try to paste the mask in here, it becomes obvious in the same place. So let's bring a surface mask in here, and now we are altering the colors instead of using monotone colors. So let's go into the luminosity, bring it down, or alter these colors a bit. No, I'm really not liking the amount of color that we have here, nor the mask itself. So let's go and paste worn dripping knot. Let's make it obvious as well. So let's make it something like this. Reduce the strength of the mask. First remove the sharpness. Bring the strength down. And now let's go and manipulate the mask. Something like this. You see, we have now added a lot of edge damage in here using the same colors and altering them instead of using monotone colors. And this one will add a lot of more extra sharpness to the image. So this is looking like a box of matches and not really wood-like. So let's go into the mask in here, and let me see if I can paste another fill layer. From procedurals, in here, let's go for something like this, tiling up, up even more, and try to subtract it from that. Instead of using UV projection, I'm going to call a triplanar projection. And now let's set it to be subtract instead of that. So you see it has added a lot of color breakup and mask breakup in here. And I don't want that one to be so pronounced. Let's make it something like this. And of course, I really do not want to add a lot of huge colors in here, in the mask, in the edge section. This is really not happening in real life. So let's select this, and for the color, let's make it something more neutral, something like this, instead of having a real color like this on edges. Let's go for something a bit less pronounced. Something like this will do. Okay, and now let's go for another ones, for those ones. I'm really liking how the woods are turning out. And later on, when we try to add second layer, second UV details onto this, it will make them pop a lot. So paste another layer, and now use this instead. And this adds some overall surface noise onto this. I really do not want it. This one, some color swatches in here. So let's invest in it. Go to here. On the scale, I'm going to set it to 2 so that we see them more often. And the good thing is that we have set it to triplanar projection instead of using UV projection, and we can manually move these, rotate them, and do all sorts of things that we can do on these. So this is something like that. And now let's go to the color and make it darker a bit. And of course, I can reduce the effect dramatically to make it more natural. So again, paste the pass-through layer and check this on and off. Really nothing. No, this is nothing really. Let's use this. And this is a bit overall color undulation, which I might like or not. So let's first manipulate the mask to see what we come up with. Bring the global intensity down. It's good on some parts, like these, you see. It adds some color variation in here. So let's go in here, and instead of using this color, now I'm going to add a filter and use hue, saturation, and lightness, and give this another hue. For example, you can go for this to something like moss, or if you want to go for that effect. So let's go for something else, something towards this. Make it a bit more pronounced and make it lighter just a bit. And now overall, I feel like this is becoming a bit noisy. So let's come in here, and I can safely remove this layer. It's a hard choice. I really love this one, but I really have to make hard choices sometimes. So this one, let's make the effect of the base color a bit less stronger, and for the height, let's go and make it not so pronounced, something like this. And for this one, this is also too noisy. Let's make the effect of the color a bit less strong and bring this one up. Okay, And now these are becoming a lot more procedural looking. So let's go and add some of the finer noise details from these sections. So let's copy the effect again and use this concrete edge. No. And I'm trying a lot of things to see if I like something or not. This dirt scratches is good somehow for altering the parts that we have sculpted down. For example, something like this, and make it a bit darker. So before and after, you see a bit of darkening happening in here, not so much, but something to consider. So paste the effect again and use this mask. And this is good for adding chippiness of paint wood if we wanted to create. But these are not going to be painted wood, so we're not going to use them. So I'm selecting them one by one to see if I like the effect of some of them or not. And really try not to use all of them because it makes them too noisy. And sometimes you might have to change something to get what you want. So this is all looking good. And now let's make the tiling twice more. This one also. And let's make the effect not so strong, just something so neutral. Paste the effect again and now use this. No, let's see about this. No, these are not good as well. So some edge rusting. This is something to consider, but really do not want to make the effect so strong and it becomes noisy in some parts. But let's go in here and make the effect not so strong. We just want to point the edges to be a brighter just a bit. So let's make the edges a bit more stronger using this. Yeah, I'm liking the effect. It's very subtle and adding a bit of edge highlight and side highlight in here as well. So this is good. Let's make it less stronger, and this is good. I believe I'm liking how these woods are going, and since we are not going to add a lot of details into this and make them too noisy, I'm going to call this texturing done. But later, and before wrapping up anything, let's add a bit of edge highlight in here as well to make the edges pop up a bit more. So I'm not going to go so much. I'm only going to a bit something like this to point out the edges just a bit, not so much. Okay, I'm totally happy with how this is going, and we are left with these two only. And we can repeat the same process over and over again on these, or I can simply create a folder in this one, call it metal, and add a black mask. First, let's add a visible color. And now let's go into here into this mask section and pick up these two ones so that everything we add into this layer only affects these two. So let's go into here and pick one of the metallic smart materials, excuse me. For example, this one could be alright. You see it has a lot of edge breakup damages and things like that, working alright. So I'm not going to use this. And since this one is so small, it's not really worth the time we put in here to texture this. So I'm going to use one of these smart materials to texture them. I want them to have some metallic value to them. Let's use this steel mask, not this one. This one is going to be alright. Yeah, this one is alright. I'm happy with it. So we successfully textured this, and in the next chapter we're going to take care of these barks as well. But before that, let me tell you something. For example, let's say that we are happy with this folder that we have created here. You can simply right click on it and convert it into a smart material, and it creates a smart material based on the folder name that you have put in here. And let me save it so that I do not lose any progress. And we created a smart material based on that. So let's hide this and bring these barks and drag this one out in here, and it's going to calculate all of the layers that we painted and do the same effects on these as well. And you see it has painted these based on the smart material that we created there, and this one is not textured, and that is because we have created this mask. Let's remove mask. There's an option here called remove mask. It's here. Let's remove mask, and now it has painted these based on the texture that we painted there. And it's a great smart material. I'm going to use this and keep it later on for other usages. So let's look at these two each other, compared to each other. No, I'm not going to use these sparks using the same texture because they start to become really look like each other, and not really what I'm liking. So this is about a smart mask creation, a smart material creation. You can create them, you can rename them. For example, put your own name into this and do whatever you want to do with it. So this was the first chapter of texture creation inside Substance Painter. In the next chapter, we're going to take care of these bugs as well. So see you in the next chapter.